Did you finish?
Well, no, that's fine.
Do you wear gloves?
Well, when you're working with radiation, it's very important to wear gloves. You have to wear gloves and change them constantly
Wear a lab coat?
Yes,
Have to be careful about what you touched?
definitely.
At some point when you worked at ICN, did you take some molecular biology classes at Bethesda Research Laboratories?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe those classes, please?
Back then, I took a class that it had to do with molecular cloning, which was kind of a process that's used to make more DNA that they were more used to using back in the past before PCR really got its start.
Did you have to wear gloves with that?
Yes,
And be careful?
of course.
What did you have to be careful about when you were doing those sorts of jobs or assignments?
Well, in a different way, when working with radiation, you don't want to contaminate yourself, obviously, but you can also cross-contaminate the different types of chemicals that you're working with. So, to certain extents, both things are very important as far as wearing gloves and keeping good, solid practices and procedures.
Okay, you mentioned the term cross-contamination. You know, we're going to be talking about that quite a bit. So that's something that's not unique to the forensic application of DNA typing?
No, it's not.
Is that a standard laboratory practice in your career before you joined the police department?
As far as wearing gloves and changing them, yes.
And being careful?
Yes.
Okay. When did you actually join the Los Angeles Police Department? Do you recall the month and the year?
April, I believe, 1990.
Okay. And after you joined the police department, did you continue to take courses in your area of interest,
Yes, I did.
both through the police department and elsewhere?
Well, they were all through the police department, or through the lab, yeah.
Okay, why don't you describe some of them?
Well, could I refer to my
Sure.
CV?
While you're looking that up, you're not a peace officer, is that right?
No, I'm a civilian.
Okay.
Mr. Scheck, you have a copy of the CV?
Perhaps not the latest version.
Mr. Scheck, you want to just take a look at what Mr. Yamauchi has?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Harmon?
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you, from the earliest to the most recent, could you describe the kinds of courses which lend themselves to the expertise that you have in the area of forensic DNA typing as well as conventional serology?
Objections, in fact, not in evidence yet.
Oh, well.
Okay, I started out taking a forensic serology class in May of 1990, and that was at the California Criminalistics Institute in Sacramento, California. That's a part of the Department of Justice. And in July of 1991, I had a zone electrophoresis class, also at the California Criminalistics Institute up at the DOJ. I've been to a crime scene investigation class, also through the California Criminalistics Institute, and I received training at a place called AGTC in Denver, Colorado, for immunoglobulin allotyping training.
Could you describe what that is, just briefly?
That's kind of a fancy name for something that's very similar to the ABO system, except it gives you more information.
And AGTC, is that a private laboratory that regularly conducts training sessions?
Yes, as far as I know, yes.
Okay. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And in September of 91 to January of 92, I took a class through, I believe it was Cal State Fullerton, and it was held at the Orange County Sheriff's Crime Laboratory, and that dealt with the forensic application of molecular biology.
Okay, now, is that the first forensic class that you took with respect to DNA typing?
Forensic, yes, yeah, I believe so.
The Orange County Crime Lab has their own DNA lab, is that correct?
Yes, they do.
And are those the people that conducted the class?
No, this was held by a professor from Cal State Fullerton.
Do you recall what his name was?
I believe Fromson.
Okay, why don't you take up from there, then, the next classes that you took?
Actually in January of '92, I had a isoelectric focusing class also at the California Criminalistics Institute. And in August of '93, I went to a forensic PCR amplification training workshop. And that's put on by Roche Molecular Systems, who at the time would have the patent, and well, they still do have the patent on PCR.
And are they the ones that have developed, manufactured, and produced the kits that are used for PCR DQ alpha typing?
Yes.
Where was that course conducted?
That was at Alameda, California at that time.
Okay, how many hours did that class consist of?
About 64.
And did you get any sort of credits for that?
There was a certification of completion, yes. Yes.
So you got some sort of certificate?
Yes.
Did that entail hands-on work?
Yes, it did.
Can you describe that, please?
Well, we went through the PCR process and with DQ alpha as well as other markers, which I don't do yet, but we're working on getting that online. That would be D1S80, which was discussed earlier, and also the polymarker system.
Who were the
PM
instructors in that course?
Well, we had Henry Ehrlich talked for a while. We had Jennifer Mihailovich from Ed Blake's lab came and talked. Judy Allen, I believe is her name, was the coordinator of the class. And let's see, Brian Raxel, I believe, was there to talk for a little while at the end also.
Okay, how many students were in the group?
Somewhere between 15 and 20.
And were these people from all over the country?
Yes.
And did you have to take any sort of exam? You mentioned you got a certificate. Was there an exam involved, too?
I believe there was.
Okay. Do you continue to keep abreast of developments in forensic DNA typing as well as forensic serology?
Yes, I'm a member of the California Association of Criminalists, and one of the things that they have associated with that are monthly study group meetings, and I try to attend those as much as possible.
Okay, do you also read scientific literature in the areas that you're interested in?
As far as pertaining to the casework I do?
Sure.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, what journals do you read?
Well, there's a number of them, just specifically.
Sure.
Well, I've read articles pertaining directly to the PCR process. I can't remember all the names and the titles and the abstracts and that.
When did you first become exposed to PCR DQ alpha typing at the Los Angeles Police Department lab?
First become exposed? Could
Yes.
you clarify that?
Yeah. When did you first become aware that the laboratory was going to do PCR DQ alpha typing?
Well, from the day I started, there was talk as to implementation of the DNA technologies. And at first, they were talking about RFLP, and that was what was of interest. And later on, as the PCR, technology developed and it seemed more feasible, that was talked about more and more.
And is that about the same time you started taking the classes that had to do with PCR typing?
No, I believe they were talking about it before that.
Okay. How did it come about that that became part of your assignment, PCR typing?
Well, I believe because of my background working at ICN, I had some experience working with DNA.
And when did that happen? The decision to have you do some PCR typing?
To learn and be trained. It must have been sometime in 1993.
Okay. And when did you first begin using, just in-house, PCR DQ alpha typing?
When did I do my first case, or?
When did you just begin your handling of PCR DQ alpha typing in LAPD in any form?
I'm sorry, I don't have the specific date to that, but it would have been in 1993 sometime.
Okay, early or late, 93?
Probably mid.
Okay. And were you the first person in the laboratory to begin implementing PCR DQ alpha typing?
No,
Who was?
Aaron Riley.
And when did that begin?
I'm not specifically sure.
How long before you began implementing PCR was it that she had begun?
Well, we were assigned the project together, except she was given more of the responsibilities because she had training from the FBI. And I'm not real sure when that was, but it was prior to 93.
Now, will you describe who Erin Riley is and what her specific assignment and title is within the laboratory?
I'm sorry, she's also another criminalist working in the serology unit, and well, we work together. She's also a criminalist too.
Okay. Had the LAPD laboratory, not you, but the laboratory itself, begun accepting casework before you began accepting cases?
Casework as to the PCR process?
Yes.
Well, yes, we did in a way. We did accept cases, and after conventional screening, they may or may not have been shipped off to different laboratories that did have the technology online.
Okay, and will you describe your first exposure to PCR typing in the laboratory? I'm not talking about casework. I mean the first actual exposure you had within the laboratory, aside from the classes you've just described for the jury.
Object to that question. Exposure is vague.
Sustain. Want to
When
rephrase
did-
that, please?
When did you first begin performing PCR DQ alpha analysis, not on casework, just in any form within the laboratory?
PCR. Once again, that would have been sometime in 1993. I don't have the specific date.
Okay. What did you do prior to that with respect to PCR DQ alpha typing before you actually began performing tests?
I did conventional serology.
Okay, but with regard to PCR DQ alpha, what did you just pick it up one day and start doing it?
Did I? I'm sorry, I don't.
Did you study protocols before you began performing the tests?
Yes, of course.
Okay, would you tell us how you began your implementation period with PCR DQ alpha?
Well, I went over the user guide that's provided by Roche Molecular Systems and looked through that. And this would have been prior to my even going to the class. But Aaron Riley had gone to the class, and so I had that information available to me. And I went over those protocols and procedures, and with Ms. Riley's help, I went through and tried to run the strips.
Okay, and over how long a period did this implementation last for you before you began doing casework?
Between the parts where I was studying and everything, 6 to 8 months.
And was it in that period that you took any of these classes as well?
Yes.
And which of the classes? The one at Roche?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember when you actually began or accepted your first case for PCR DQ alpha typing?
I believe I have it written somewhere.
Sure, if it would help to refresh your recollection if you've got it written down somewhere.
first case was assigned to me in October of '93, and the first case for PCR that I'd completed was in November of '93.
May I just look at the note that he's using?
Yes. Mr. Harmon?
Thank you, Your Honor. How, the jury's seen some of these strips, okay, and what I want to do is, I want you to describe about how many strips or tests that you actually performed with using the PCR DQ alpha system before you accepted your first case. Do you have any idea?
How many strips? Well over 100. I would have to go back and count, though.
You could if you had to.
Yes.
Go back and count. In terms of conventional serology electrophoresis tests, can you give the jury some sense of how many times you performed those sorts of tests on evidence samples?
Electrophoresis, hundreds of times.
Okay. And have you ever testified as an expert in the field of conventional serology electrophoretic typing?
Yes.
How many times?
Oh, over 20.
Over how long a period of time?
The 5 years I've been a criminalist.
Do you take any sort of proficiency tests?
Yes, we run samples from CTS and College of American Pathologists.
Okay, now that's for the PCR DQ alpha system?
Yes, and they also have for conventional serology.
Have you taken any of the,
Samples.
I'm sorry, have you taken conventional serology proficiency tests?
I have once.
Okay, how many times have you taken proficiency?
1054 objection is to the conventional serology tests.
Overruled.
How many proficiency tests have you taken which depend on the PCR DQ alpha marker?
I would say approximately 8 or 9.
Over how long a period of time?
Well, the year and a half or so that I've been doing PCR.
And did you actually take any proficiency tests before you accepted your first casework in October of '93?
I might have. I would have to go back and check the records.
Now, you've mentioned two organizations, CTS,
Yes.
that's the Collaborative Testing Service,
Yes, it is.
and when you take those tests, do you know it's a proficiency test?
Yes.
Do you know what the answer is ahead of time?
No, I don't.
Okay. When you take the CAP, that's the College of American Pathologists?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know the answer ahead of time when you take that test?
No.
Do you know it's a proficiency test?
Yes, I do.
Have you ever been graded as having made a mistake in any of those proficiency tests?
No.
Does that mean you couldn't make a mistake?
Does it? Well, no, it doesn't.
Have you ever testified as an expert in a court in the field of forensic PCR DQ alpha typing?
Yes.
How many times?
Twice.
In what courts in this county?
Yes.
Have there ever been times when you've attempted to testify but have not been found qualified to testify in the field of PCR DQ alpha typing?
No.
When were those two times?
I would have to go back and check the records.
Okay. Can you give us a ballpark?
Last year.
Now, in the test that you performed, the PCR DQ alpha testing, have you ever excluded anyone who was suspected of having committed a crime?
Yes.
Any idea how many times?
Well, offhand, I can think of at least once, but there might have been more.
How many strips test samples have you subjected to the PCR DQ alpha test as you sit there today?
I'm not sure. I would have to go back and count them all.
Can you give us a ballpark figure?
Like 500 to 1,000, maybe even more than that. I don't know.
Do you have any idea how many actual cases you have worked on for PCR DQ alpha typing?
I believe around 60.
Does the Los Angeles Police Department have a lengthy written protocol for the performance of PCR DQ alpha testing?
Objection, characterization.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Does the Los Angeles Police Department Scientific Investigations have a written PCR protocol?
Yes, we have a set of guidelines for our PCR practices.
Okay, and does the protocol include other PCR markers in addition to DQ alpha?
I believe so at this time.
Okay. And are you familiar with the Los Angeles Police Department Scientific Investigation written protocol?
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
Is it based on the Roche DQ alpha user guide?
Yeah, many parts are very similar.
We're going to talk about some events in June and then move on pretty shortly, but I'm going to ask you questions about PCR DQ alpha tests you performed on evidence in this case in the middle of June. Okay, but before we get to that, I'd like to ask you generally, when you performed the tests that you will be testifying about shortly on the evidence samples in this case, did you perform them in accordance with the Los Angeles Police Department SID written protocol for PCR DQ alpha typing?
Objection, since that's not evidence.
Yes, I did.
Let's go back to June 13th, 1994. What hours were you working those days?
It was either 7 to 3:30 or 7:30 to 4.
Do you recall late in your workday on June 13th having a conversation with Greg Matheson about what you know this case is about?
Yes.
What did Mr. Matheson discuss with you?
He asked me if I...
Objection, hearsay, I think. is
Sustain.
coming.
It's not offered for the truth of the matter, Your Honor.
Sustain.
Did you have a discussion with Mr. Matheson about this case?
Yes, I did.
And based on this case, and did you consider what Mr. Matheson discussed with you late on June 13th in deciding what tests to perform ultimately in this case?
Yes.
Did you actually do anything with respect to this case on June 13th,
No, I did not.
other than the conversation with Mr. Matheson?
Yes, other than that conversation.
Do you remember what time you came to work on June 14th?
June 14th,
Yes.
7 or 7:30.
And did you have another discussion with Mr. Matheson?
I believe I talked to him in the morning, yes.
And now, you're in the serology division, okay? Do you have a separate room within the laboratory?
Serology?
Yes.
Yes, there's a serology unit area.
Okay, and is that something that there's security to get in, some sort of security device?
We have to use our access cards.
And do you understand there's actually a printout that shows the comings and goings of people if they use the access card?
Yes.
Have you seen those things occasionally, the printouts?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Now, where was Mr. Matheson's office at that time with respect to serology?
At that time, he was serology supervisor. His office would be within the serology unit.
Did you talk about this case?
Yes.
And what did you discuss with Mr. Matheson?
At this point, a hearsay objection. Depends on what
Sustained.
he's going to list.
It's to explain his future conduct. It's not offered for the truth of the matter, Your Honor.
I can get an idea of what he
Why
intends
don't you
to
confer
do.
with counsel? Would you confer with counsel briefly?
No problem. Your objection? Based on what he told me.
Proceed.
I'm going to turn the clock back a day then and ask you, let's go back to June 13th, the end of the day. You have a discussion with Mr. Matheson about the case.
Yes.
What did Mr. Matheson tell you at that time about the case?
He asked me if I would want to work on this case. He's not sure all the aspects, but he believes that it could involve sexual assault as well as blood evidence and conventional and quite possibly PCR testing.
Okay, what else anything else come up in that conversation?
I can't remember back all that well.
Okay, let's talk about the next morning. You go in, you're talking to Mr. Matheson again. Did you have a more specific discussion with him at that point?
Yes, I believe so. He probably had more information then, so we would talk more.
And could you tell us what you and Mr. Matheson discussed at that point?
At that point, he seemed to think that we had evidence that would need certain types of specific testing. And I recall him talking, possibly doing something that would be fast, like an ABO test. And we discussed that a little bit, and I said, well, ABO has limited power of separating things out. Because, for instance, a type O can be approximately half of the population. And so because that system's kind of weak in that respect, we discussed the possibility of using PCR DQ alpha, because that would have a little bit better chance at sorting things out into finer groups.
And you mentioned that speed was somehow of importance. Why was that?
And I believe at the time there were reasons that I wasn't quite aware of or made aware of, but they had to do with investigative reasons why the detectives would need results rather quickly.
During the discussion with Mr. Matheson, were specific items of evidence talked about?
He referred me to Dennis Fung to discuss what items of evidence would be good to pick and choose for analysis.
Was anyone else there in serology at the time you had this conversation with Greg Matheson?
Well, I can't remember back all that well who was there and who wasn't.
I mean, is that an area where many people work?
Well, yeah, there's usually the serology unit members are always in and out.
And did you have this conversation with Mr. Matheson in his office or out in the laboratory work area?
One or the other.
Okay. As a result of that conversation, or strike that, was Dennis Fung a party to this conversation?
I believe I first talked to Dennis back in the evidence processing room.
Before or after this conversation?
It would be afterwards.
So was Dennis Fung present while you were having this conversation with Greg Matheson?
I'm not sure.
After the discussion that you've just mentioned to us, did you go back to find Dennis?
Yes, that would have been the next thing on my mind. Go look for Dennis to go discuss what stains to pick out and analyze.
Is that what you did?
Yes.
Where did you find him?
I believe I must have, well, let's see here. Yeah, I would have talked to him in the evidence processing room because that's where he would be discussing the evidence with me.
Okay, and do you recall about how long after the conversation with Greg Matheson it was that you found Dennis Fung and talked to him about the case in the evidence processing room?
It's got to be less than half an hour, less than 15 minutes.
Okay. Do you recall if anyone else was present when you had a conversation that you'll be telling us about this afternoon with Dennis Fung?
This afternoon, what was that?
Sorry, but it's a bad question. We take the break now, Your Honor, before we move on?
Well, why don't you ask him that last question?
Sure. But was anyone else present when you had the conversation with Dennis Fung about this case?
No.
Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess for the morning session. Please remember all of my admonitions to you. Don't discuss this case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. Do not allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. Council will stand in recess until 1 o'clock. And let me see Ms. Clark and Mr. Cochran.
Been hearing this all along, but we have controls and we have sample, and that's why there's generally two there. Well, regardless of order, I handle these in the same fashion, so I don't necessarily do my sample and my control first. But what I would do is open this up, put it down onto the Kim White pad, and then I would proceed to opening up the scalpel blade, and then take out the sterile scalpel blade and do my cutting. And then with the sterile scalpel blade, I've learned if you press down on it at a certain angle, you can actually pick the sample up that you're going to put into the tube. And when you get good at this stuff, like anything else, you can take a tube and you can open it up with one hand and then put the sample in, close the tube off with one hand, put it away. The scalpel blade goes back into the container it originally was held in so that it doesn't cut anybody. That's put to the side or, tossed out if you've got the receptacle there. Then the same process is started all over again. This is closed off. Sometimes I'll initial the bindles, or I'll initial the coin envelope, or I'll do both, just to be on the safe side. These Kim wipes, along with the scalpel blade, rolled up, tossed into the receptacle, and then work on the next one. The whole process all over.
Okay. And then what would you do with the bindles?
The bindles are then placed back into the coin envelope, put on the side, and then the whole process starts over again with the next one. But this has to be closed off before you start on the next sample.
Why
You
is
don't
that?
want two of them open at the same time, because even though if you separate it out, it's still not good lab practice to have them open simultaneously.
All right, Mr. Yamauchi, why don't you return to your seat on the witness stand, please?
Now, when you actually open one of these bindles, we've had a discussion about you approximate how large they are and describe them in your notes.
Yes, I try to achieve that approximation by drawing them out.
that what you did in this case?
Overruled.
Yes, it is.
And do you have notes that actually describe the numbers and sizes of the swatches in this case?
Yes, I draw out all the swatches, and I have notes to that.
And why do you do that?
Well, just to give me a general idea of what's there.
And when you actually cut one of these swatches, do you make any sort of record of what you cut?
Yeah, occasionally, and in this case, I do a score mark over the swatch that I cut in the drawing.
Okay, Your Honor, I'd like to have marked as Exhibit 279, one of Mr. Yamauchi's notes in this case.
All right. Which page?
Mr. Yamauchi, I'd like to show you Exhibit 278 for identification. Is this the...
278 or 279?
The 279. Are these the notes that you made with respect to documenting the sampling of the items in this case? Or
Yes,
some of the items?
yes,
These are the items that were in the coin envelopes.
yes.
And just to go back to that again, giving us the evidence item numbers, could you tell us which evidence items you processed in the manner that you've just demonstrated to the jury for the first set of tests that you'll be discussing?
Objection vague as to time.
Rephrase the question.
Could you give us the numbers of the evidence items that you processed on the morning of June 14th?
Okay, again, referring to my notes, the evidence item number 52, 49, 50, 48, 47. And according to my notes, sampled between 10 and 11 approximately on the 14th of June 1994.
Okay, Your Honor, I'd like to put 279 up on the envelope if I can. Mr. Yamauchi, let's look at item 49, if you will. Could you just assist the jury in interpreting all the information that's in that horizontal row there, starting with 114?
114 was, and it's in quotes because that's what was written on the coin envelope. The 49 above it was written in once I knew which item number it corresponded to. And then coin envelope, and then in quotes, 114, describing the coin envelope. And paper bindle, and one of the paper bindles with, in quotes, number 114, describing what was written on the paper bindle. And then there are 6 swatches drawn out. And then in the next column over, it says 5.5 swatches ample.
What did you mean by that, 5.5 swatches ample?
I just described what was left over after I sampled.
And does that horizontal row, does that also show where you tried to show how much you cut, which item you cut and how much you cut?
On the last swatch, I did a dotted line to show approximately where I scored it.
Okay, and looking at what appears to be 114C, the substrate control, what's the wording that you have to the right of that? What's that reflect?
White with BRN, which to me means brown specks.
Okay, and would you jump up one column and look at what's 117C or 52, the substrate control? What observation did you make about the color of that substrate control?
Pink color.
And so did you do that with each and every one of the stains and substrate controls that you sampled on June 14th? In other words, make that kind of documentation.
Yes, in my casework, I oftentimes take general, very general color descriptions of what's there.
Okay, and how near to the actual size and shape of the swatches are your little sketches of those swatches?
Well, it's pretty close, but it's not meant to be a precise sort of a depiction.
Okay. How long did it take to complete the sampling process of these coin envelopes? 41, items 41, 42, 47, 48, 49, and 52.
Well, I listed in my notes that they were sampled between 10 and 11, so sometime within then.
Okay. And what did you do with each of these coin envelopes after you finished processing it in the way that you've demonstrated for the jury?
Well, they were placed back where I found them.
Okay. Now, in terms of who had responsibility for those items at that point in time, who was responsible for them now that you had completed your sampling of them?
They'd be in, I guess, the custody of the person that was collecting them. That would be Dennis.
Dennis Fong. And is that normally the person that books them?
The person that collects the items, yes, generally speaking, is the person that's going to book the items.
So at this point in time, can you describe, you mentioned something, you showed the jury how you unscrewed and screwed the cap on these microcentrifuge tubes. What were you putting them in?
A microcentrifuge tube rack.
And how many tubes can each of those racks hold?
It varies. Usually there's 16 to a row. I think these had, I would say approximately 32 for that particular rack.
And are those tubes, do they provide a safeguard against contamination if the seal is on them?
Sustained.
What are those tubes made out of?
Some kind of a plasticky substance, polyethylene perhaps.
What's the purpose of the cap?
The purpose of the cap is to seal it off, make sure that nothing gets in or out.
And is it your practice never to have more than one?
Sustained.
What is your practice with respect to having more than one tube open at a time?
Well, that's not a good idea. It's something you don't want to do.
And did you have more than one tube open at a time in any of the processing of the evidence in this case?
No.
After you processed the coin envelopes in the manner that you described, did you then turn your attention to the glove that Mr. Fung had talked to you about?
Sustained.
Did you process the glove at some point that morning?
Sometime in the morning or maybe the early afternoon, I'm not sure specifically.
Okay. Tell us how you began that processing activity.
Well, taking a look at it, I knew I was going to have to sample it in some way, so I had somebody come by and photograph it. As far as the handling specifically of the gloves, I put a clean piece of paper out and examined the gloves on top of the clean paper. Excuse me, the glove. So, talking about number 9.
Sure, the glove that was found at Rockingham,
Right.
number 9. Now, where were the tubes, the microcentrifuge tubes in the racks? Where were they when you began processing the glove?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Where were the coin envelopes when you began processing the glove?
The coin envelopes would have been in that same area that they were given to me at.
Okay, and where did you process the glove?
I seem to recollect working on the hard bench countertop that's just, it would be right to the side of the table that all the evidence was on.
When you say right to the side, can you give us a little better description of the relationship?
Well, it's kind of hard to without a picture, but let's say it would be on the same countertop that the clean paper is by.
And what top is the set of coin envelopes on?
It's on a table that's in the middle of the room near the hood.
A different table than the glove was on?
Yes,
Okay. And you put a clean piece of paper down?
yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, again, that's standard lab procedure to make sure you treat evidence in such a way that it won't contaminate with anything.
Okay. Will you describe, you mentioned you brought somebody over to photograph the glove?
Yes.
Who was that?
I believe I tried to get John Taggart, and it might have been Mike Wilson that photographed it, one or the other.
And when did he photograph it in relation to the sampling that you undertook?
I'm not sure.
Was it before or after?
After.
Okay. Will you describe the first part of the processing of the glove, please?
Okay, the glove was laid out on the paper, and it really wasn't super obvious that it was could have been soaked in blood or could add a lot of blood. So I did what's called a phenolphthalein test. It's a presumptive test for the presence of blood.
How did you do that?
Well, that's done by taking a clean cotton swab, moistening it with deionized water, and allowing some of the stain that would be on the glove to transfer to that swab. From that point, chemicals are added to that swab, and these chemicals, upon reacting positively with something that's most likely blood, will turn a pink color.
Okay. And how many separate areas did you perform the phenolphthalein test?
I'm going to look at my notes.
Sure. Did you make those notes close to the time that you did the sampling?
Yes.
Okay.
One, two. About seven times.
And what were the results of those phenolphthalein tests?
In each spot that I tested on that particular glove, there was a positive result.
Okay. And that's just an indicator that it might be blood?
Yes, it is.
Okay. What did you do after you got those 7 presumptive positive results from the glove?
Well, I knew I needed to pick a spot to sample the glove, and one of the things we have problems with in PCR is when you use leather in the testing, it's been documented that leather causes inhibition of the test. So it's often hard to get results when you use leather samples. So what I did was I collected from a number of different areas, and 2 of them I took actual cuttings of the leather to see if I could get results. And to back myself up, because I knew that leather didn't always produce results, I also took a cutting from an area that was not made of leather, and that would be the lining area. as well as I took one sample from an area by swatching in the same manner that was described to you out at the crime scenes, where we use the cotton swatches to transfer the stain to the swatch and then analyze that swatch.
Did you attempt to take a substrate control from the glove?
Well, in the process of trying to find an area that was free of any blood, I decided that, well, in this case, this glove seems to be covered with blood to a certain extent, and I wasn't going to mess around and test all over the place to try to locate an area that may or may not have blood. I didn't want to manipulate that item any further at that point. So I chose at that time not to collect control on this particular item.
Okay, and did you make notes in a drawing that reflected the areas that you sampled on the glove?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I have marked as Exhibit 279? I'm one behind today. 280?
280.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I put it on the projector, Your Honor? Mr. Yamauchi, is this the sketch that you made at the same time you were conducting the sampling on the glove?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and in the lower left-hand corner, looks like there's a notched area and something says initials CY. Could you tell us what that is, what that represents?
That's where I put my identifying mark on that particular item.
Okay, and if we could move over to the right sketch a little bit, could you describe to the jury what's shown in the right-hand sketch on 280 for identification?
That would indicate the area where I spot checked for a control, as well as an area that I ended up sampling for testing.
Okay, if you would, you got an X with an arrow to it that says spot check for control. That's one of the phenol areas?
Yes, it is.
And then I see a letter, is that a letter D, where it says phenol, and then sample cutting taken?
I think that's the area I marked off as the area where I sampled.
Okay, that's just a circle where you cut it out?
Right.
Okay. And then it looks like the thumb area. Could you describe to the jury what that shows?
Again, there's the area where I would have sampled.
Okay, and that's, you've designated that area B?
Yes.
And the one looks like it's inside the rear, or inside the wrist on the back of the hand. That's area C?
Yes.
And then can we go up to the next sketch there? You've got that described as backside of the glove. Can you describe to the jury what your notes mean in that?
Okay, on A, I took a cutting, and that also was phenopositive. And on D, that area down towards the right, lower right corner of the glove, that was the area that I sampled the stain by use of a cotton cloth swatch.
And I believe you did that to try to avoid the inhibition problem that's well known?
Yes, just in case I couldn't.
Hold on. Withdrawn?
It's leading the,
Withdrawn.
it's gone.
I'm sorry. That's yes, because I knew that could potentially cause a problem, so I decided to sample in different ways, and that was why.
Okay, so, and you've labeled them A, B, C, and D. Did those lettering follow the samples that you cut out or that you took from the glove when you did your processing in this case, or your typing?
Yes.
Okay. Now, up to this point, Mr. Yamauchi, you've described making the Fitzco card, processing the coin envelopes, and the glove. At some point, did you come back to the Fitzco card?
Yes, eventually I sampled that card.
And when was that in the sequence of events?
Sure.
Last.
Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. I left out a little bit here, Mr. Yamauchi, I'm sorry. When you made these cuttings from the glove, what did you do with them?
They would be in the extract tubes.
Microcentrifuge tubes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and how did you process them when you're doing all this sampling of the glove? Could you describe the sequence that you did them in? The samples?
You mean when did I sample each particular one?
Sure.
Well, I'm not sure, but judging by my notes, I would have done it in the A, B, C, D order.
Okay. And each time, or would you describe what you did each time, how you put it in the tube?
Okay, for each particular area sampled, if say I used a cutting, I would have went through that process like I was cutting up a swatch. I would have used a sterile scalpel blade for that particular area, and then manipulated the tube with that hand and used the scalpel blade to put the sample into the tube, just in the same way as I did with the clot swatches a little earlier. And with collection of the clot swatch, I would have done that by taking sterile water and a clot swatch, moistening the clot swatch with the water and rubbing it on the area of the glove that I intended to get a transfer and transfer some of this biological fluid onto that. And then I would have taken that swatch and put it into a microcentrifuge tube in the same manner, not allowing any of the tubes to be open simultaneously.
Now, where was the processing of the glove done with respect to the Fitzco card that's drying somewhere?
It would have been about 10 feet away.
Same table or different tables?
That would be at that time on the same table.
But about 10 feet apart?
Yeah.
So you've got the Fitzco card drying, everything in tubes, and I believe you said you sampled the Fitzco card last?
Just try to sustain, rephrase the question.
Did you sample the Fitzco card after you sampled the glove?
Yeah, yes, looking at my notes, that was the last thing in order.
Could you tell us what you're looking at there and why you're so sure that you sampled it last?
Because I have my DNA extraction record, and that was the last one I listed.
Okay. And how did you actually go about sampling the Fitzco card?
In the same fashion as if it were an evidence item, all the same precautions being taken. It would be cut out with the sterile scalpel blade.
Put in the same kind of tube
Yes, in the same microcentrifuge tube.
and in a rack?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I believe in some of your earlier discussions, was it impressed on you that there was a hurry to do this testing?
To a certain extent, they wanted investigative information.
Okay. And is there any way, if you hurry these things, that you can change the results?
Leading. Go for his question.
Based on what you knew, did you have an expectation what the outcome of these tests would be?
Speculation? Overruled.
It's not offered for the truth of the matter, Your Honor.
I overruled the objection.
So,
Okay, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
sure. Based on the information that was made available to you, what did you expect the outcome would be?
Objection. Overruled.
You mean, like, from what I heard on the news, or?
Yeah.
Overruled.
Well, I thought it would be an exclusion.
Why?
Your Honor, move to strike. I'm going to see counsel at the sidebar with the court report, please. Mr. Harmon, 2:30.
Excuse me, Your Honor?
2:30.
Okay. Mr. Yamauchi, you've been watching television, the televised proceedings in this case occasionally?
Yes.
Have you heard the term examiner bias?
Yes.
You familiar with it?
Well, I'd like to hear an explanation, but I have an idea of what it means.
Okay.
Overruled.
Based on what you'd heard in the media at the time, or, before you did the test in this case, did you have an expectation what the outcome of these tests would be?
Overruled.
Well, on the 13th, the last thing I heard in the evening,
Your Honor, that's
It's non-responsive. Did you have an expectation, yes or no?
yes.
And what was that based on?
Objection.
Overruled.
Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
Well, like I was saying, I heard on the news that, well, yeah, he's got a airtight alibi. He's in Chicago, and and it's his ex-wife and this and that. And I thought, oh, well, he's probably not related to this thing.
All right. Let me see counsel at the side, bro.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, where do you actually begin the PCR process in the LAPD SID? Where's the first step performed?
The extraction,
Yes.
yes, that would be performed in the serology unit at Piper Tech.
Okay. Now, where is that in relation to, the jury's seen a diagram, I'm not going to get it up again, but how far away is that from the evidence processing room?
I'd say over 100 feet.
Okay. How did you get these racks with the microcentrifuge tubes from the evidence processing room to serology?
Well, they were capped and I carried them there.
Okay. Now, you've referred to something that lists the order in which the samples were processed that you used to help to refresh your recollection. What are you referring to?
Well, that's my extraction record.
And is that the order that the samples were actually processed by you?
Overruled.
No, it's not, but it refreshes my recollection as to the last one I put on there.
Okay. And with regard to the next step or the first step in the PCR process, the extraction process, what order did you process the samples for extraction in this case?
They would be, as to the item number on this sheet, which is a different number from what the actual item number is. There's a listing of the extraction number, which is 84, and then it goes chronologically down through 21. I usually set my tubes up in that order
Okay.
for the extraction.
Sure. And would you please describe the order in which you process these tubes for extraction? If you need to refresh your recollection, that would be fine.
Okay, according to my extraction record, item number 9, glove, A, backside sample is 84-1, followed by item number 9, glove, B, thumb sample, glove, C, inside back of wrist, glove, D, back below little finger. And then item number 112, which, as we discussed later, is actual evidence item number is different, but that would be the photo item number at that time.
And that's LAPD item number 47, the evidence item?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And then item number 113. Oh wait, I skipped over the control. But the 47 with the red stain, and then its control. And then listed on my sheet is item number 113, which is 48, red stain, followed by its control, and so on for 114, and then 115, and then 117, and then 106, and then 107, and finally item number 18, O.J. Simpson blood exemplar.
Okay, you started skipping there. Did you process the substrate controls with 49, 50, and 52 right after you did the red stain?
Objection, meeting.
Sustained.
When did you process the 49 substrate control with respect to the red stain?
In the extraction, it would have been one behind that,
One behind the red stain?
yes.
And then when did you process 50 control with respect to the 50 red stain?
Right behind the 50 stain,
And before 52?
yes. Keep in mind, though, that to a certain extent, this is all happening at the same time period. It's just that you can only open one cap at a time, like I described before. So there is an actual process.
And so you, in this step as well, you never open more than one tube at a time?
Sustain.
In this part of the processing, do you ever open more than one tube at a time?
No,
And then you mentioned 106 and 107, that those correspond to 41 and 42?
yes,
And did 41 also have a substrate control?
Overruled.
yes,
And did 42 also have a substrate control?
yes.
Why did you process 41 and 42 at the end of the line, like as you've described them?
I really can't give a particular reason for that.
Okay, how about the reference to, or the, by now it's been the cutting from the Fitzco card, why was that last in the order you process things?
Objection. Left. Withdraw.
Yeah, it was the last thing I was working on, and I don't know, maybe I subconsciously grouped them up together as exemplars in a group.
And were there also other items that you processed in this, in this extraction process period?
Yes, there would be blood standard number 1.
What is
As-
that? What is that?
Described earlier, we were talking about controls. Well, within our analysis, the laboratory testing, we have controls that go beyond the ones that are just collected at the scene. There are both positive and negative controls. The positive controls show us that, yes, you do get this certain type of, the process works, and, you know, it's what you expect. The negative controls shows you that there's no contaminating factors or anything weird like that going on. In this case, blood standard number 1 is what I use as a positive control, whereas the next one down after that is the cloth control, and that would be utilized as a negative control.
All right, Mr. Harmon, I think this would be a good point.
Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess. Please remember my admonitions to you. Let me ask you to step back into the jury room at this time. Mr. Yamauchi, you can step down.
Where it was, I believe, stated, at least in his recollection, that the defendant was in Chicago at the time that he received the call. We already have testimony to that effect. That's nothing new. And it's certainly not a part of his testimony, a part of the defendant's statement. To say that his recollection of a news report somehow opens up the defendant's statement, it makes no sense at all. And I think that the court needs to look at the statement itself. But the testimony, if we have it read back, will make that very clear. He was watching the news. He saw a news program saying the defendant was in Chicago, and so he concluded, this witness concluded, that he had an alibi.
Can we have the witness leave the room?
The witness knows what he testified to. He just said it. And to say somehow, for the defense to argue that somehow that opens up the defendant's statement is ridiculous. He's talking about a news report and a conclusion he drew from that news report. What does that have to do with what the defendant said?
Well, here's the problem. What Mr. Yamauchi said was, quote, like I was saying, I heard on the news, well, yeah, he's got an airtight alibi. He's in Chicago, and you know that, and it's his ex-wife, and this and that, and I go, oh, well, he's probably not related to the scene. The problem here is he's got an airtight alibi. Now,
That was this witness's conclusion, Your Honor.
I understand that. The problem is, a party has brought in the alibi part. He's got an alibi. They have brought in, I think you got a 356 problem.
We We don't have a 356 problem, Your Honor. We brought out this witness's entire knowledge of the events. And he's not premising that on his knowledge of the defendant's statement because he didn't know what the defendant's statement was. No one did. How could that possibly be a 356 issue with respect to a defendant's statement when he didn't even know about it? He's not talking about that. He's talking about his conclusion drawn from the fact that he heard the defendant was in Chicago. How could that possibly relate to the content of the defendant's statement?
The statement
He didn't
is,
relate to the content of the statement either.
he's got an airtight alibi. He
That-
was in Chicago.
That was this witness's conclusion, Your Honor, not a reference to that statement. He made no reference to the defendant's statement, and he didn't even know about the defendant's statement. How could we possibly have a 356 in a situation where the witness doesn't even know what that is? The witness is talking about his state of mind, what he concludes from a news report, nothing to do with the defendant's statement. So how can we have a 356 issue with reference to a statement this witness never talked about, never knew about, never mentioned?
You ask him a question that elicited, he's got an airtight alibi, he's in Chicago.
That was this witness's opinion, Your Honor. What does that have to do with the defendant's statement? Which, by the way, does not state that he had an airtight alibi because he was in Chicago. That was not his statement.
All right.
So how could we possibly have a 356 on that?
Points and authorities tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock.
All right.
Oh, absolutely.
Sir, we certainly aren't going to yell at Your Honor and become hysterical. We would,
I
I just
object
point
to
out.
that
okay,
characterization, Your
well,
Honor. That kind of personal attack is very improper and inappropriate. The court knows that it was simply advocacy. I'm not yelling at anyone. And for Mr. Cochran to make that kind of sexist remark, hysterical, I take great umbrage at it. And I think the court should not countenance that kind of behavior.
I don't.
She finished? Yeah, Your Honor. I'm not going to yell at Your Honor. I'm going to try to deal with the facts. Mr. Scheck, as the court is quite aware, tried to object at the appropriate time, and we even had a sidebar in this regard. The people brought this matter out. They're hoisted by their own petard. We will welcome the opportunity to do this, Your Honor. I think you're absolutely right. It's a 356 problem. This witness was very clear. They brought it out to the jury, and now we think we have a right to bring out Mr. Simpson's entire statement. We have no objection, Your Honor, seeing that statement, no objection to the points and authorities, but we think it's very, very clear. They've opened the door, Your Honor, with a Mack truck, and we think we can walk through it. And I think it's very appropriate to do that. So we'll be glad to
Points
do
and
that.
authorities tomorrow
Thank
morning,
you.
9 o'clock. All right, we'll take a 15-minute recess. Jury members, Mr. Yamauchi, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, Mr. Harmon.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Yamauchi, you had mentioned that the next tube in order was the cloth control. Can you explain to the jury what the function of the cloth control is in the PCR DQ alpha processing?
It acts as a negative control in the analytical process. For that particular step, from that point on, it would show us whether something funny happened or not.
When you say show us whether something funny happened, could you give us an idea what you mean by that?
Well, it's kind of inherent in the way I described it. By negative control, we expect it to come up negative. But if it comes up and it shows that there's some activity or something there, then quite possibly some of our solutions at that point could have been contaminated. And this would be a way that we could double check and know later on if something was astray or different, that at this point a contaminant was present.
And how would that tell you if any of those things happen, that control?
That control, like I was saying before, generally speaking, we expect it to be negative. But if some activity comes up throughout the whole process where we see something on a strip, then we know that perhaps something happened at that stage, and it would help us and aid us in troubleshooting.
When you say see something on a strip, you mean a typing result?
Yes.
Okay. And what about the next control in order after the cloth control on this first set of DQ alpha typing? What was that? After the cloth control?
On my extraction sheet, there's nothing else
Okay.
after the cloth control.
I believe at some later point you also add amplification controls.
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, at this point, I'd like to have marked as People's 281 for identification, a photo display board. The LAPD PCR typing board.
All right, 281.
Okay, Mr. Yamauchi, you've generally described the extraction procedure that you utilized in this case. In referring to People's 281 for identification, could you step down and using the pointer, could you please describe what's shown in the photograph, starting at the top horizontal strip that we've boxed in? It's entitled Piper Tech Extraction. Now, the jury has heard what Piper Tech is, but you've mentioned that the extraction is in the serology room?
Serology, yes.
Okay, and in the left-hand photo under Piper Tech Extraction, could you explain what you are doing in that photograph?
Okay, at this point right here, the first step is to add 1 ml of sterile water. And that's to get out some extraneous components that may or may not be a problem. One case in point would be the heme group that makes blood red. That's a known inhibitor of the PCR process. So at this point here, by adding the water, it puts that heme group in the solution, and it can later be separated from the DNA that we're actually after.
Mr. Yamauchi, could you try to keep your voice up, because you've got your back to the court reporter, too. I know it's important that we all get to hear you, okay? Good, okay. What's in the next photograph, the middle photograph, under Piper Tech Extraction?
I believe I'm actually putting the water into the tube at that point.
And is that the same tube that you started out by putting the cuttings that you made over in the evidence processing room in, or is that a different one?
Yes, that would be what's going on there.
Okay, and then over on the right-hand side, what is that you're doing, and what is that machine?
Oh, okay. After the water's placed into the tubes and allowed to soak for about 20 minutes or so, it's then put into what's called a centrifuge, or microcentrifuge, hence the name microcentrifuge tubes. This is why they belong together. It goes into that instrument, and it spins it down at such a high velocity that all the solid components, or the heavier components, like DNA, for example, are going to be forced towards the bottom, while the other components that are in solution will just remain in solution.
Okay, now, what do you do with those tubes that are, after they've been centrifuged at the end of the extraction process? What's left?
Well, from that point, there's another step where we add a chemical called, well, it's a kind of a mixture of chemicals called Helix. And it acts in a specific function in the extraction process and this is kind of weird because they're not really sure what its actual action is, but they do know that it does aid in taking out a component that could help in the degradation of DNA. So to a certain extent, it acts as a kind of a preservative.
Now, are there different forms of extraction processes that one can do in order to do the PCR DQ alpha typing?
Helix is the one we use at our lab, or the one that I use in this case. There's also what's known as a phenylchloroform extraction.
Is that what's known as organic extraction?
Yes.
Okay. Now, are you familiar with the Amplotype user guide for PCR DQ alpha typing that's provided by the manufacturer?
Yes.
Are both of those extraction processes described in the user guide?
Yes, they are.
Why did you do the Kelex extraction procedure in this case?
Well, generally speaking, that's the procedure that we use, or I use personally most often. And that would be one reason. The other reason would be that it actually has lesser steps and is faster.
Okay. And do you process the evidence, or strike that? When you perform the extraction process, is it your practice to never open more than one tube at a time?
Sustain. Phrase the question.
Yes, the same question always does that.
Speaking objection, counsel.
Mr. Yamauchi, how many tubes do you open at any given time during the extraction process?
The same thing goes for this process, one tube at a time.
And is that something that you adhere to throughout the whole PCR DQ alpha processing?
Overruled.
Yes.
And for the same reasons you described in the beginning?
Objection made.
Overruled.
Yes.
Now, could you describe how long the Kelex extraction process takes in comparison with the organic extraction process?
Well, I haven't done the organic one in a while, so I'd have to reference that to get a time frame on it. But as far as the Kelex is concerned, for blood stains, it's in an hour and a half about you can get the extraction completed.
And is that the normal amount of time that it takes you?
Sustain.
How long does it usually take you to perform the Kelex extraction process in other cases?
Objection made with respect to Senator.
Overruled.
Yes, an hour and a half.
Now, at the end of the extraction procedure, where do all the tubes end up?
They would have been kept in that same rack,
So
closed off.
how do they get from the centrifuge to the rack?
Well, I take them out.
And then what do you do after you put them in the rack?
After they're put in the rack, see, the next step would be amplification. So that rack of tubes would have to go over to where we have our thermal cycler, and that's the machine we use to do the amplification. We have that set of our laboratory over at the Parker Center facility. So there's a space difference of about a couple miles maybe or so. Got to hop in a car and drive over there.
Now, are you familiar with the provisions in the Amplotype user guide with respect to the relationship of the amplification room to other work areas in the PCR DQ alpha process, the recommendations?
The recommendations, safety precautions, they want all these rooms basically separated off in space, and especially the amplification room and the extraction and examination areas.
And why is that?
To eliminate the chances of cross-contamination. What's especially of interest at this point is when you're dealing with the amplification area, there's a second type of contaminant called, well, you've probably heard this already, PCR carryover. It's where the product of the PCR process is more likely to contaminate things than just general DNA because it's of a perfect size and sequence. It's more likely to be a harmful contaminant. And that's why we take extra precautions to keep this area physically out of the way of the other areas where we do our extractions and our evidence analyzing.
And yours is pretty separate then, huh?
Well, yeah, yes, in our case it is.
Are you aware of any other laboratory that has those two rooms so far apart?
Objection, no foundation.
Overruled.
No.
How do you get from Piper Tech serology to the Parker Center? How did you get there on June 14th in this case?
Via car.
Government car?
Yeah, the city car.
And will you describe how you transported the rack with the tubes?
Well, the closed-off tubes are in the rack, and then one of those Kim wipes I described earlier, there's larger versions. I'll wrap that whole rack and everything up in the Kim wipe and transport it that way.
Why did you put the Kim wipe on it?
Well, mostly because when you're walking around the police station, it makes the detectives and people over there kind of nervous if they see little test tube things. So I just want to make sure it's covered up.
Can you describe the facility or the rooms that you have over there? Are they normally staffed by anybody?
Over where?
At Parker Center?
At Parker Center, it would just be the DNA people.
Okay. And is there somebody whose assignment is to be there all the time?
No.
How is it utilized?
When we need to do amplifications, we go over there.
Is that the only function for those rooms?
Basically, yes.
Over.
Basically, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether or not it's routinely kept locked?
Objection made.
Over.
Yes, it is.
And where do you obtain the key?
Well, I have a key, and Aaron Riley does, and Harry Clan, because we work in that area. And
Okay.
I believe some supervisors do too. I'm
Now,
not sure.
Harry Clan, that's a new name that you haven't mentioned yet. Who is he?
I'm sorry, he's the other DNA analyst that we have.
Okay. Do you recall about what time it was, or strike that, let's just talk generally. You get over to you've got your key to the amplification area at Parker Center. Will you describe what's shown in the photograph on the left-hand side? It's labeled pre-amplification. What are you doing there?
This is a room that's separated from the amplification room. The amplification room is the one with the instrument, the thermocycler. And in this pre-amplification area is where we set the tubes up, process them with the right chemicals to be taken over and placed into the machine.
How many different rooms are there in the amplification area at Parker Center?
We have 4 rooms in that area.
And you've described pre-amplification. Is that the same room as the amplification takes place?
No, it's not.
Okay, so the photo on the left-hand side shows what you've just described, and that's in one room. And then the next photo is labeled amplification. What's going on in that photograph?
That's where the actual amplification process takes place. That's where the thermocycling machine is housed in that room.
And at this point in the process, are there additional controls that are added to the controls that you described in the extraction process?
Well, those would be set up over here, but yes, there are. For the amplification process, we have another positive and negative control.
And what is their function?
Well, like I was saying before, we have that controls that we take at the scene. We've got controls at that extraction point. We also have another set of controls at this point where we're going to run the amplification, just to give us more information again.
Okay, what's shown in the next photo on the right, the hybridization, or the one that's labeled hybridization, what are you doing there?
Let's see, that's to display the hybridization strips that we have. And those are the strips that contain the probes that we eventually get our results from.
Okay, and this is all the commercially available product?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and photography, what does that photograph on the right-hand show?
Okay, at Parker Center, after we do the strips, we've got the photograph now, and that's the area over there at Parker Center that we do that.
What are you actually taking photographs of?
The strips themselves.
Okay, and then what do you do with the strips?
Well, we throw the strips away after we're done.
Why is that?
Well, because the strips themselves, they'll tend to discolor, and they won't be as good as that original photograph if you hold on to them. So we have no reason to keep them.
Okay. Now, at this point, generally speaking, as you do the procedure in the Los Angeles Police Department, you've got photographs of the strips, and the board has another line entitled PiperTech Product Gel Electrophoresis. Can you describe what's in the left-hand photo, the picture of those doors?
That's the room at PiperTech where we perform the product gels.
What is the name of that room,
It's the instrument room.
and where is that in relation to serology?
It would be separated from it by walls, but it's kind of like right next to it.
They're adjacent to one another,
Yes,
but separate rooms?
yes.
And is there some sort of security device that monitors people coming in and out of the instrument room?
Yes, we also have to use those access cards for that.
Now, what do you need to take from the Parker Center at the end of the amplification and hybridization back to PiperTech to take into the instrument room? What are you actually taking back there?
I have to take some of the amplified product from this reaction that's held in the thermal cycler, and that has to be brought back to PiperTech to be analyzed in this product gel.
And what's the purpose of the product gel?
It's to kind of tell you whether or not the amplification process took place, and it can also give you more information as to a relative idea of how much DNA was formed by the amplification, although that's not real accurate.
Now, a little while ago, you mentioned that it was important to avoid PCR product carryover to keep the amplification separate from other areas. It's foundation. Yeah. Do you recall discussing that a little while ago?
Yes.
Does bringing the PCR product back into the instrument room violate that?
No, the reason why we have it in the instrument room is because it's separated physically from serology, where we do our extractions.
Are you familiar with other laboratories where all of these functions are done within the same building but in different rooms?
That sounds reasonable, yes.
Okay. And what do you end up with at the end of the product gel electrophoresis?
You wind up with electrophoresis gel where the product is moved through an electrical field, and so it can be visualized and noted.
Okay, we can take the board down. Do you want to have a seat again?
Some additional questions.
Oh, sure. Now, this board doesn't actually reflect everything in the same position and location as it was when you performed your tests on June 14th and June 15th, does it?
Well, this work area right here
The product gel.
was changed. We were on a bench area that was kind of around the corner from that at the time that I actually analyzed evidence in the Simpson case. But since then, we've had to move our stuff over to the other corner.
Same room?
Yes, same room.
How many feet apart?
Now 10, 15 feet or so.
Okay.
Is it the same equipment?
Yes, the equipment's the same.
Okay. You can have a seat again, Mr. Yamauchi. Now, you've described the samples that you that you sampled and that you extracted. Did you subject them to the PCR DQ alpha testing process in the manner that, in the general manner and sequence that is shown on Exhibit 281, the photo display board?
Yes.
Okay, and if you can, I'd like you to break down the process and ask you about how long each step took, if that's possible to do. For example, how long did the Kelex extraction process take you on June 14th for the samples that you've described to this jury?
As in any casework sample or situation, it's about an hour and a half.
Okay, And then from the extraction process, did you go right over to Parker Center after that?
Overruled.
Well, I don't know when I had my lunch that day, but that would have been the next step. Eventually, I would have had to drive over there.
And you processed them, amplification, hybridization, and photography in the manner that's shown on the photo board 281 for identification?
Overruled.
Yes.
Okay. And did you obtain PCR DQ alpha results on samples that are in the list of samples that you've previously described to the jury?
Yes, I analyzed those samples.
Okay. Could we have the...
Matter that we have to approach on just prior to.
With the court reporter, please. Mr. Blazier, let me see you without the court reporter, please. Thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Yamauchi, could you step down here for a second? Okay, I wanted to start out by describing some of the results you obtained. Mr. Yamauchi, you have described 4 separate stains from the glove, 9A, B, C, and D, which you subjected to the PCR DQ alpha process. Is that correct?
Yes.
How many of those stains or cuttings produced results in this case?
I have to check my notes.
Sure.
And Mr. Yamauchi, could you keep your voice up, please? Thank you.
Two of the stains,
And which 2 did not produce results?
A and B.
And were these were 2 of the leather cuttings?
Yes.
And did that surprise you, given what you've talked about in terms of leather inhibiting the PCR process?
Sustain. Raise question.
Sure. You mentioned something earlier about leather inhibiting the PCR process.
Yes.
What was that?
Leather is known to inhibit the amplification part of the PCR process. So to answer your question, it didn't surprise me.
Okay, and have you read, is that mentioned, I think, in the user guide that,
Oral. Is that
I'm not-
mentioned in the user guide?
I'm sorry?
Is that mentioned in the user guide?
I'm not sure if I know if it's in the user guide, but it is in other literature.
okay. What about 9C? What PCR DQ alpha results were obtained on 9C, the sample?
The results I obtained on that item, 1.1, 1.3, 4, with a possible 1.2.
Okay, and 9D, what result did you obtain from 9D?
1.1, 1.3, 4, possible 1.2.
Okay, could you, if you would, use the pointer, and to the best of your ability, I know you didn't take these pictures, could you get the pointer, Mr. Yamauchi, and show us the area on the glove where 9C was removed from?
I'm going to have to refer to my notes.
Sure, would that help?
Yes.
You realize the top two photos show the glove inside out, and then the bottom photo shows the palm side of the glove on the outside.
Yes, okay. The 9C was taken somewhere in this area.
Okay, you're pointing to the general area. Could you point there again? I don't want you.
Somewhere around here.
The notch area?
Wrist area, yeah.
Okay, and you pointed to an area a little distance away from G13.
Yeah, approximately.
Okay, and then where was 9D taken from?
That would actually be on the other side of the glove.
On the back,
Yeah, the back side,
on the outside or inside?
on the outside.
Was 9C taken from the inside or the outside?
That was the inside liner.
So it was the inside liner,
Yes.
in the back of the hand?
For 9C, 9C was the inside liner. 9D was on the back of the glove, around that area.
Okay, well, let's go back to 9C. Was it the back of the hand? If my hand, my right hand, was in a glove, would the surface touching my hand that you got 9C from, would that be on the back of my hand or on the palm side of my hand?
I believe the back.
Okay, and then 9D was from where?
If you were to turn this glove around, it would be along this edge here, somewhere in that area.
Along the, why don't you show on my hand where that was?
Somewhere around here.
Okay, I'm not sure what this is called. I know there's a medical term for it, but right here.
Isn't that the heel?
Okay.
Well, jury got the idea, so.
Okay. If you would, I'm not sure if you could reach it, could you remove from the result board 272A the cover over PCR results? Can you reach it?
No. Need somebody tall. Mr. Neufeld.
Okay, and at the time, I know ultimately you were provided reference samples in this case, but at the time of this first run, you did not have reference samples from Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But ultimately, you did process them the next day?
Yes.
Okay, and are the types that are shown up on the board, the DQ alpha types for Mr. Simpson, who was running this first set of runs, and Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, the DQ alpha results up in the top there, are those consistent with the results that you obtained on the samples that were provided to you?
that stipulation acceptable to the people?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
We'll stipulate that those are the results that he obtained.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, could you remove under the not excluded column, the sort, from among the three reference types that you typed in this case, whom you were unable to exclude from the results that you obtained on 9C and 9D? Okay, is that correct, that you were not able to exclude either Nicole Brown or Mr. Goldman or Mr. Simpson from those tests?
As a possible mixture in conjunction with those results.
Okay, now, is there some question about the possible 1.2 as it relates to Mr. Simpson? That
Well, we really can't make a statement once a mixture's present, whether
Right.
that's there or not.
Okay, and had you done additional typing, might you have been able to make a better statement than...
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
I'll just move on, Your Honor, that's fine.
I move to strike that and...
No, juries to disregard the implication of any of that question. Proceed.
Get the Bundy photo board and the Bundy result board, Peoples 165 and 259, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to direct your attention to the results you obtained from item 48, which was photo ID number 113. Did you obtain a result on item 48?
Yes, I did.
And what result did you produce in your PCR DQ alpha typing?
1.1, 1.2.
Okay. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to, I've got a cover that could you put this over the DQ alpha results that are on 48? Sure, just cover over, there you go. Right there? So the record can be clear what Mr. Yamauchi just did, Your Honor. He placed a cover over the DOJ DQ alpha D1S80 results that reflect his DQ alpha results.
Yes. It being a magnetic removable strip.
Can I make a suggestion, Your Honor? If he moves the strip to the right, I think you can see everything.
Well, it's his presentation.
Okay, so, Mr. Yamauchi, if our board's correct, you... Okay, now voted. So I'm putting it to the right of the DOJ DQ alpha 1112 results. So if our board is correct, did you get the same results on DQ alpha that DOJ did?
Yes.
And did you get the same results in DQ alpha, if our board is correct, that Cellmark did on stain 48, photo item 113?
Yes.
Okay, in addition to processing 48, did you also process the 48 substrate control through the entire PCR DQ alpha process?
Objection leading. Asked
Overruled.
and answered.
Overruled.
Yes, I did.
And what results did you obtain?
That came out negative.
No typing results?
Right.
I'd like to, just for the record, Your Honor, I've skipped 47 until tomorrow.
Proceed.
49, did you obtain any typing results from stain number 49, which is identified as photo ID number 114?
No, I did not.
And when you say you got no results, can you provide any sort of explanation for that?
Objection calls for speculation. Resulting.
Rephrase the question.
Sure. Was there anything in your, strike that, I'll move on. So no typing results in 49.
No typing results.
Did you process 49 substrate control through the entire process?
Yes, I did.
Did you obtain any results?
No, I did not.
And so there was no typing activity in 49 substrate control?
No.
Did you obtain a result on item 50 from the walkway at Bundy?
Yes, I did.
That's photo ID number 115.
Yes.
What results did you obtain through the PCR DQ alpha marker?
On number 50, I got 1.1, 1.2.
Okay, would you place this cover to the right of the DOJ DQ alpha results? And if our board is correct, you got the same results as DOJ and Cellmark did in the processing of that stain?
Yes.
Okay, did you process the 50 substrate control through the entire process just as you did the others?
Yes, I did.
And did you produce any typing results for the substrate control for item 50?
No.
Did you obtain any results for item 52, that one that had the kind of the pinkish substrate control that you described earlier?
Yes, I did.
That was photo ID number 117.
Yes.
Okay, what results did you obtain from item 52 that was out in the driveway?
1.1, 1.2.
Okay, would you put this cover up to the right of the DOJ DQ alpha results? You got the same DQ alpha result that Cellmark and DOJ did from those stains?
Yes, I did.
Did you process the substrate control, the pinkish one that you've described?
Yes.
And what results did you obtain on the substrate control?
No results.
Item 41, that was, I believe you described it earlier as a potential reference sample from Ronald Goldman. You recall that description? And based on what Dennis Fong told you?
Yes.
Okay, and did you obtain any results from item 41?
No, no results.
Did you obtain any results from item 41C, the substrate control?
No.
Do you recall how long it took to do the PCR process from start to finish? When I say start, I mean from the time that you got to serology to begin the extraction process until the time you completed your tests that you just described to the jury.
Per night, each,
No, the length of time from start to finish.
we're talking about each set, because I did do 2 days worth.
Sure, I'm sorry, June 14th. I mean the ones we've just presented to the jury.
Okay. Well, it took pretty much the morning, the day, and into the early evening.
Okay, and at some point, did you communicate the results of your testing to Greg Matheson?
Yeah, that evening,
How did you do that?
by telephone.
Do you remember about what time that you finished or you left work that night?
I'm thinking around 8 or so. Might have been later.
Okay. I can go on with a few other things, but this might, you want me to keep going? Okay.
Let's use the time.
Now, Mr. Yamauchi, we have already, the jury's already seen some of the notes that you compiled as a result of your work in this first series of DQ alpha runs. Could you just briefly describe, they've seen some of the processing notes, but what sorts of notes and logs do you keep with respect to the DQ alpha processing? If you just start at the beginning and give us the titles of the reports and what their function is.
Oh, you mean like the DNA extraction record?
Sure.
Okay, that would be one of the sheets we'd start out with.
And what
then-
sorts of information is recorded on there?
We would record something to the effect of an item number or some identifying number, as well as the extraction number and the chronological order that that's associated with.
What's the next record that you keep in the sequence of events?
Well, then we would have the amplification record.
What does that record?
That records what samples are being amplified.
And are there numbers assigned to in some point in the process?
Yes, the amplification record has an amplification number and the chronological order corresponding to each of the sample tubes.
And are you actually looking at the sheet for this first run right now?
Yes.
What number was assigned to the series of samples that you processed?
It's amplification